So let's talk about 3 main methods of birth control and kind of the thoughts behind why they might or might not be okay. Hey girls, Tiffany Dawn here, and today I want to talk about birth control.
And also a few select comments from myself and Natalie, although I'll be talking for both of us.
So basically, to get pregnant, there's 3 things that are involved. Number 1, you have to release an egg. Number 2, the sperm has to get to the egg. And number 3, that fertilized egg needs to implant in your uterus. So okay, knowing that, let's talk about birth control. So oral contraceptives, or the pill, basically it releases more estrogen into your body, and that makes it so you're less likely to have the egg there, less likely for the sperm to reach the egg, and sometimes it can make it so the lining of your uterus is such that it's harder for the egg to implant. Clearly, our egg did implant with Natalie, who you can hear in the background playing with her daddy. They are so cute. So in normal life, like without any birth control, from what I've read, only 50 to 60% of fertilized eggs actually implant in your uterus. About half of them just pass right through. And so some people look at oral contraceptives and say, well, it can make it harder for the egg to implant in my uterus after the egg is fertilized. And so that could be causing an abortion. Other people would say you need to have a fertilized egg and it needs to implant in order to even get pregnant. And so I think the pill is okay because once the egg is implanted, it doesn't hurt the egg, it doesn't hurt the baby, and so it's not causing an abortion.
I personally believe that life begins at conception. But the question is, when is conception? And I think philosophically, I can see the argument where you could say, hey, as soon as the egg is fertilized by the sperm, life begins. That's conception. But I can also see the argument that says, well, a lot of the time that fertilized egg doesn't implant and doesn't result in a pregnancy, even if, when you're not using any kind of birth control. So life really begins when that fertilized egg implants on the wall of the uterus. And so at least for me, I would feel comfortable with either of those viewpoints, but I don't know that I would feel comfortable saying this viewpoint is the right one and the other viewpoint is wrong. I just don't think there's enough philosophical and scientific data to exclude one of these viewpoints.
One of the other main methods of birth control is using condoms. And condoms are what's considered a barrier method. It makes it so the sperm cannot get to the egg. Some people believe that that is not okay because you're preventing a chance of pregnancy. And some people even quote this story in the Old Testament about this guy named Onan, who basically, okay, it's kind of a weird story. In this culture, in the Old Testament, if a woman's husband died and hadn't given her any children, then the brother-in-law was supposed to step in and fulfill the duty to give her children. So this guy, this brother-in-law, Onan, he came in and he slept with his brother's widow, but he then pulled out so that he couldn't get her pregnant. And that was considered a huge sin. And so some people will take that and say, well, preventing the sperm from getting to the egg is a sin. I actually don't think that was at all the point of that story in the Old Testament. In that story, it was all about he was unwilling to fulfill his duty to that woman that was required by the law. So, but that's why some people will decide not to use condoms. And if that is your conviction, that is totally okay.
Now, I've heard some people argue, well, if you're using birth control and you're having sex, you're being selfish. Because if you're having sex, you should be open to having kids. I think that that would be true if the only purpose of sex was procreation. And I think the reality of God's design, if you look at sex throughout the entire Bible, is that sex is for much more than just procreation. There certainly have been a number of moral philosophers who have argued that sex is just for procreation, but I don't really think that jives with what the Bible says. And Song of Solomon is a great example of how God's design for sex is much more than just procreation.
And then the third method that some people will choose is natural family planning. I learned natural family planning as taught by the Catholic Church actually after my miscarriage because it helped figure out like what was wrong with my body that was causing the miscarriage. It was actually really cool. There's certain days of the month that you're fertile and there's certain days that you are not fertile. So days you can get pregnant, days you can't. And if you don't want to get pregnant, you have sex on the days when you can't get pregnant, you're not fertile. When you do want to get pregnant, you have sex on the days when you are fertile. It's actually medically as effective in preventing pregnancy as the condom and the pill if it's used correctly. I have friends who love God with all their hearts, want to honor him in everything they do, and they are on the pill, some are on condoms, and some are on natural family planning. And for them, that is the way that they honor God in their marriage.
Whatever you decide to use, I would strongly encourage you to discuss it as a couple and discuss it with a medical professional.
Go with what your convictions are. Like, talk about it as a couple, pray about it, and decide, here's what we think would honor God in our marriage.
Anything else I should opine on? Or that Babykin should opine on?